Hello, everybody. Since I don't have a cold opening really this time, Brad, I just want to ask how your Memorial weekend was and inquire a little bit about what the Dieter family did. And also because this is the first Memorial weekend where there were three of you. So
I spent Saturday. I spent taking all of the patio furniture out of my garage and putting it out on the deck. So that was most of that. And I did all my yard work. And then Sunday, I changed the oil on my snowplow. And I took the dogs for a long, you know what? I can't say the word because one of them is
because they're going to freak out.
And hung out with my wife and the baby. That was pretty much it.
Excuse me. When you're winterizing your winter vehicles and winter, like like snowplow, for example, or whatever you use in the winter, do you put seafoam in the engine and then let it run until it dies?
No.
Have you ever really? Because you don't leave the gas in there, do you?
Well, my snowplow I use in the winter, and then I just take the plow off in the summer and drive it around.
Oh yeah, so I guess you don't have like an actual like push snowblower.
No, I have like a side by side with a plow.
Gotcha.
It's pretty awesome. It's like my favorite thing I've ever bought. Like for people who know me, I don't like having stuff. Like every time I've ever bought something, I just sell it because I hate having it. But my snowplow was awesome, and I was really sad this winter when I only got to use it like once because every time it snowed, I was here in Spokane, so it was very sad.
Yeah, we just have a snowblower, and for the first 2 years I had it, every time I'd winterize it, I'd let it run out of gas. And then the next winter I'd try to start it and it would never start. So I had to take it apart, pull the carburetor off, clean out the gunk in the carburetor, put it back on, and it would start. Turns out I didn't know that you could just buy a can of seafoam, put it in the gas, let it run until it died, and the seafoam would clear out the gunk of the carburetor, and now it starts every year. So, hey, you live and you learn. All right. I'm glad you had a good Memorial weekend, and I hope everyone else did as well. And we've got a good show for you this time because this one affects maybe all of us at one point or another. That is people who are into this, in this space, the nutrition and fitness space, and that is being in a calorie deficit. We've all tried, dieting at one point, losing a little bit of fat. If you're going to do that, you have to be in a calorie deficit. So that affects all of us, and it's not always fun. It's almost never fun. Nobody really has ever. I've never heard someone say I enjoy being in a calorie deficit. So today is going to be about that, and specifically how to manage your calorie deficit so that you can make it, let's just say, not suck so much. It still is probably going to suck a little bit, but we're going to hopefully make it so that you guys can take your calorie deficit and lose weight, and it won't be as painful. So that's what we're going to dive into, and I hope you can take a lot away from it. And let's just dive right into it. So a calorie deficit, I'm just going to start with a quick definition. Sorry, I think I have another cold again, thanks to one of my 4 kids transferring germs to me. A calorie deficit means you're consuming less energy than you burn. So you're eating fewer calories than your body expends. And that's the only way to lose weight. So just as a real quick definition, that's what it means. We purposely eat less than we burn. So, and that is the root of every diet out there. It aims to create a calorie deficit. I have a question for you, Ivan. I don't think I've ever asked you this. When was the last time you personally dieted or were in a calorie deficit?
Purposefully?
Yeah, like you were, hey, I want to lean up or whatever it is you wanted to do.
2011.
I was going to say it's probably a long time ago, right? Because you are not someone that needs to be like you're already a fairly lean person, so it's like you wouldn't really have a reason to do that.
Well, I mean, it's more been like I've been maintaining my body composition for 14 years because like it took me a while to get to where I was like, where I wanted to be body fat wise, and then it's been like just, I mean, there's been periods where I've like reduce calorie intake, increase calorie intake based on like my life. But yeah, like a 6 to 12 month span of like purposefully dieting to lose body fat, it's been quite a while.
Yeah.
But
being in a calorie deficit, I always boil it down to it's the law of thermodynamics, right? And we could get into, we probably won't because we won't have enough time. And I don't know if I just, it would be deeply complex. But when you're talking about eating food and the way that we extract energy from the food, there is some level where biomechanics turn into physics. Like, there's some line there where the body still has to adhere to the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics. But it's fascinating to me how your chemical and physiological processes that take place within your body, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is the laws of physics translate to the human body through biomechanical and chemical transactions, right? Super interesting to me. And so what is that field of study? If we were to, would that just be biomechanics? Would that be just biology? Would that be biochemistry?
Bioenergetics is what that field's called. But I think, like, before we go to that discussion, I think to take a step back, because you had a note in the show notes of like a calorie deficit is not just eating less.
Oh, right.
And I think that's a really important perspective. And so I think a lot of times people assume a calorie deficit means eating less food. What it actually means is it's a relative number, right?
Yeah, good point.
You can have a 500 calorie a day deficit eating 500 calories, or you can have a 500 calorie a day deficit eating 4,500 calories, right? It's all relative. And I think it's sort of the same way, like the same analogy is like getting rich or building wealth, right? Wealth is the difference between how much money you earn and how much money you spend, which means you could be really wealthy if you spend zero and earn a lot, right? It's like, if let's say you make $10,000 a month and you spend $9,000 a month, or you make $100,000 a month and spend $99,000 a month, the relative wealth of each of those people is the same. Now, if you make $100,000 a month and spend $9,000 a month, that's a lot different. The same thing applies to like a calorie deficit. And so one of the perspectives that I think we don't think about enough is we always assume a calorie deficit is driven from eating less. That is the predominant perspective because of the world we live in today, right? Like, historically, the average caloric expenditure of a human in a day was like 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. Now it's like 1,500 to 2,200 because we just don't move.
Well, we used to have to work for our food too. Don't have to really do that anymore.
Exactly, right? So are you clicking your mouse on the table? I can hear it. Or your fingers?
I have this card. Sorry. I'll stop.
Yeah. So it's the relative deficit or the relative calorie deficit based on how much you expend and how much you consume. And so as we start to talk about like how you manage it, managing a calorie deficit is really hard if you're trying to eat 1,000 calories a day. Like, it's just, we're driven to eat socially, biologically, psychologically. And so you have to find, what does that actually mean? And how do I increase the output while also managing the input? Like, the most successful people I've seen in terms of who lose weight and maintain it is they find a way to drive the output side of the equation. Like, trying to live on a 1,500 calorie a day deficit just doesn't work very well. Or 1,500 calorie a day intake for most people just doesn't work very well for 30 years at a time.
It's hard to stick to, right? And this is, we'll get into this too, is some of the common mistakes and the struggles that we see people make where it leads them to believe they're in a calorie deficit when they're actually not. So I'd like to dive into that part and just get to what are some things that sometimes happens to cause people to think man, I'm not losing any weight despite being in a calorie deficit. Because what we often see when we like look under the microscope and we really take a deep look at their daily life, day in and day out, you end up finding, oh, you know what? Actually, it turns out I'm not really in a calorie deficit. And there are many reasons for that. A couple that I wrote down here: eating too little, too fast, or eating food too quickly. That can lead to binge eating tendencies, or just, if you eat faster, there's a lot of merit to eating slower so that you can kind of take in less. And sometimes just eating too quickly can have the opposite effect. Weekends, a huge one for people, right? They do really well. This might even be the most common one. They do really well Monday through Friday. You have a fairly regimented schedule where you wake up, you have breakfast, you make your lunch, you go to work, you have the lunch that you prepped, you come back, you track your dinner, you go to bed, rinse and repeat. And that's a pretty common structure Monday through Friday. And most of us eat the same thing regularly, week after week. And then the weekend comes and we don't have that structure. And a friend calls and says, do you want to go out to dinner? Your spouse brings home a pizza. Kids have sporting events. Oh, I got to eat something on the fly. So the weekend throws it off big time, right? That's another one. And then I think maybe the other most common one is just humans aren't great at accurately calculating our food intake. So we have a lot of tracking errors. We're just not great at math. So like there are calories that are unaccounted for that we think we're accounting for, but again, you look at someone's food log and, we're tracking it inaccurately. One example is when I used to work with clients, I'd look at food logs and I'd see like one baked potato. It's like, well, what does that mean? Like, I don't know how much the potato weighed. I don't know. Was there anything on the potato? Or one burrito from Chipotle. I have no idea what's in that burrito. I have no idea how many calories it is. So just because you tracked it doesn't mean you actually tracked it accurately. So those are just a couple things that I think are common reasons why people feel like they're in a calorie deficit, but they're not. And same thing with soda. You don't really think of, I don't eat that much. Well, you might not eat that much, but what do you drink in soda, for example? That has calories. Like, what about those things that they don't feel like you ate something, but you consumed it, and so it still counts?
I think if we boil a lot of that down to a few ideas, humans are actually really good at math. Like, we've developed string theory. Like, we're pretty good at math. What we're really bad at is being objective about our own behavior and being consistent in the behavior for extended periods of time.
When you say objective, do you mean like honest, or like innocently, like we don't actually know? Like, it's not that we're lying. It's just both. We don't know. Okay.
Right. There is a reason that the lowest form of evidence in the judicial system is eyewitness testimony. Like, we just don't remember things the way the world is actually happening, right? Like, we are so subjective about our own reality.
Yeah.
And so that gets really difficult. So let me just kind of paint it. We know that body weight loss is how you accumulate a calorie deficit over weeks and months, not days, right? But we all think about all of our nutrition on a daily basis, right? So let's take the average person. We know that if you ask somebody to log their food or track their food, and they do it at a moderate level, like they're okay at it, they're probably going to underestimate their calorie intake by 25 to 50%. That means they're going to say they ate 2,000 calories, but they actually ate 2,500 calories. They're also going to rely on their Apple Watch or whatever to tell them that they burned 2,700 calories, right? So they, in their mind, think, okay, I ate 2,000 and I burned 2,700. Well, the reality is that fitness tracker's off by 20%. So they probably burned 2,300 calories and they actually ate 2,500 calories. So they think they're in a 700 calorie a day deficit, but they're in a 200 calorie a day surplus. That's just one day. Now expand that over a month. That's the difference between a 21,000 calorie deficit in the span of a month, which is like 6 pounds that month of weight loss, and they actually gained 2 pounds. So that's an 8 pound delta from what they think it should be and what the actual stuff is suggesting. And so this is when we talk about like managing a calorie deficit. What I try to tell people is we have a few routes we can go. One is we can try to play this game of being meticulous day to day and trying to be super accurate and rely on small margins of error and try to stack days like that for weeks or months at a time. Or let's try to like paint the extreme picture and try to adjust our habits to where no matter what, we're creating a large deficit every day. Your true deficit, like let's say we aim for a 500 calorie a day deficit and we put all the chips in our favor of doing that, right? We track our food pretty closely. We give ourselves a couple 100 calorie a day buffer on that because we know what the reality is. We don't rely on our fitness tracker. We really rely on the scale weight to kind of tell us what our average expenditure is, because we know if I'm consuming X and I'm losing Y, I know what my expenditure is. I use step count as a proxy because step counts are accurate roughly, right? We use step count as a proxy for physical activity, and we try to create this to where I'm at a large calorie deficit daily, 500 or so calories a day, and I can track that pretty much daily for months at a time and make adjustments. It comes down to habits and the feedback on the scale to tell you what is objectively true. Now, the reality is the higher you can drive your energy expenditure to a point, the more room you have for error. Right? If you're trying to lose weight on a 2,000 calorie a day energy expenditure and you're trying to eat 1,500 calories a day, well, if you're off by a couple 100 calories a day of your intake, like there's just no room for error, right? But if you're burning 3,000 calories a day, like you've got a lot more room to wiggle in terms of being a little bit over or a little bit under. And so we talk about managing a calorie deficit. It's really important to try to manage the upside expenditure of that.
Yeah, for sure. And what about this is thought of two things when you were kind of chatting about that, and that I really liked like the picture that you painted about our subjective reality and interpretation of what we're doing, mismatching reality, because from your example, one can see how easy it would be for people to then think, well, calorie counting doesn't work. I've tried it, right? It's with the picture you painted. That's one of the reasons people think counting macros doesn't work, counting calories doesn't work. I tried it, didn't lose any weight, I gained weight, whatever it might be. So that's an interesting point. And then the other thing, this sort of bleeds into the idea of hitting a plateau. When you hit a weight loss plateau, there's this misconception that, oh, it's because I'm eating too little and I need to eat more because my body's in starvation mode. We've talked about this before. But why don't we just real quick before we move on, let's chat about what a plateau is and what it's not. Because to me, a plateau is let's just say you're tracking accurately, you're really good, you're a pro at tracking. So accuracy is not an issue. All right. So if my maintenance is 2,500 calories and I'm in a deficit of, let's say I have a target of, we'll just say 2,000 calories. Kind of a steep deficit, but let's just, for the sake of numbers. I burn 2,500 a day. I'm going to consume 2,000. Eventually what's going to happen, because the laws of physics make it so, is that this calorie, there's an imbalance, right? There's an energy imbalance. And so if I consume 2,000 calories, but I need 2,500 to maintain, my body has one choice, and that is to shed fat and lose weight so that now I have a body that sustains itself on 2,000 calories. So that energy balance is there again. Now we have an equilibrium. And there's the plateau. I'm not going to lose any more weight if these things are equal. And so I need to do one of two things: increase my expenditure a little bit more. That's hard to do. But the easier thing to do is lower my intake again so that there's that imbalance. And I once again have to come down here. So that's kind of how I think of it. But to me, what we see is most people when they say I'm in a plateau, it's not more. I think more often what's happening is it's what we just talked about, the inaccuracies in their reporting, and they think they're in a deficit when really they're not. Most of the time, they're not. Now, if you're meticulous about your tracking and you're a pro and you really are tracking accurately and you've done this for 4 weeks and still no weight loss, that might actually be a plateau and you need to reduce your calories again. So that is, I think, important to clarify, is that a lot of the time when we see people saying they hit a plateau, it's probably not actually a plateau.
So I think there's a lot of stuff to unpack in this concept of reaching a plateau. And I want to show an example of some data because I think it helps explain it. But before I go there, because I've got some slides to show you guys, and I'll try to articulate it for those who are just listening. Weight loss plateaus are effectively occur / seem to occur based on 3 things. 1, it's a physics problem, like you mentioned. 2, it's a observation problem. Or 3, it's a behavior problem. And I would actually say in order, it's a observation problem, a behavior problem, and then a physics problem, right? So let me just show you some data. You can go pull graphs like this from anywhere, but this was interesting because this was a, so I can find it. I got to just show my screen here. So this is data from what was the Minnesota Starvation Study. So experimental starvation in man. This was published in 1945 from Dillon's home state of Minnesota. But basically, this was a study where they took people, they put them on a pretty large calorie deficit and had them lose weight. And they controlled all their food intake and their energy expenditure, and they were able to predict and then track their actual body weight super closely. So the like dashed line is the predicted weight, and the dots are their actual weight. So basically, within 95+% accuracy on a given day and time, they could predict their weight. And you'll notice the black dots are their calorie intake. So basically, they had them. These people were consuming 3,200 calories a day. Then they put them on a 1,700 calorie a day diet. So they knew the relative deficit, and they just tracked them. So the first reason you're going to see a plateau is an observation reason. And this is because the closer you get to your goal weight, the less true weight loss you'll experience on a day-to-day basis, right? So or a week-to-week basis. So let's say in the first month, every week, you're going to lose 2 pounds. Then in the last month of a 6-month diet, the last week, you're going to lose like half a pound. So all of those daily fluctuations that you see on the scale start to seem larger relative to the actual weight loss. So it's going to seem like you're in a plateau because of just the fact that your daily fluctuations are larger relative to the actual weight loss you're losing in a week. So the first thing is people like start to feel like they're not losing weight, even though they are. They're just losing it more slowly. The second is a physics or is a behavior thing. Our adherence to a diet decays pretty rapidly after about 6 to 8 weeks. So we start to have less adherence, which means our daily calorie deficit is less than it normally is. Couple that with the fact that we see less weight loss because of where we are in the process. So both of those make it seem like we're in a plateau when we're not. What's really happening is behavior's breaking down and the rate of weight loss is less, so it appears like we're losing less weight. And then the third is the physics problem, right? If I want to lose body weight and I'm in a calorie deficit, eventually my calorie intake is my maintenance calories. So that's when it becomes a physics problem. But for most people, it's an observation problem and then a physics, and then a behavior problem, and then at the very end of it, it's a physics problem.
Yeah, that's always I love that study. I mean, I feel bad for the people that chose to be part of it because that would suck. But it really highlighted a lot of interesting things. Have they done? I mean, surely since that, because this one gets a lot of notoriety, but surely there have been studies like this since then, right? I mean, I'm sure they've, or maybe not as many because we know we don't need to necessarily prove it anymore, but just something I had.
I mean, we've done some low calorie diet studies with, and some inpatient ones, but the thing is, it's much smaller sample sizes. This was a really interesting time in human history where this was kind of before the Belmont Accords, which kind of laid the groundwork for the ethics and research. And this was also like World War II time when there were people who were like conscientious objectors. So they were like kind of prisoners, but kind of not. So it was a really weird time in human history, but I don't think we're probably ever going to see studies like this done again. And that's why it's so important to go back and look at some of this old literature, because there's a lot of things we learned. Like what's really interesting is I have a figure on this in a project I'm working on, but like one of the original studies that looked at calorie deficits and weight loss, like this was back in the like 20s or 30s, and they like estimated someone's calorie expenditure and calorie intake and like matched their weight loss perfectly with what was expected, like within a half a pound of like variations day to day. So like these are things we know about, and we're just now trying to figure out how do we make these things behaviorally applicable in the real world in a modern environment. And like if you look at, I mean, when we talk about calorie deficits and you look at what actually occurs in like the modern world, yes, it's true that food intake has gone up, but energy expenditure as it relates to physical activity and like labor and work has dropped much more than our calorie intake has gone up. And I'd have to go look at the data again, but I would say this mismatch between this like energy balance mismatch, right? We used to have fairly high energy expenditure and moderate food intake, and we didn't really have a major obesity problem. And now we have an energy expenditure equation in which we consume more energy than we expend physically. I would say at least half, probably more than half of the change in that equation comes from the drop in physical activity as it does to increase calorie intake. I'd have to go look at it, but I think it was last time I looked, it was like our average calorie intake's gone up by like 300 calories a day in the last 50, 60 years. Our energy expenditure has gone down by like 400 to 500. And if you map the relative changes in intake and energy expenditure to what we would expect at a societal level for average body weight over time, they line up perfectly. Like the energy expenditure and the energy balance component of this matches the data like literally perfectly. And so when we talk about like managing a deficit in today's world, we have to talk about the other side of the equation of like how do we alter our daily behaviors and patterns to just move more.
Difficult too, because I mean the world has just completely changed, and the world's a dynamic place. So obviously easier said than done. Can we dive? Let's dive into some of these. There's a lot of misconceptions around this, but one that in particular that I want to tackle is the whole. I don't even know where it came from, so we can talk about that too. But the whole 1,200 calories to lose weight. Where the hell do you think that came from? Because I don't know where it originated, but like it's definitely still out there, and for some reason it's that number 1,200. Not sure where or how we got there.
I think it's because if you go look at the medical weight loss literature, 1,200 calories or lower is the kind of high end threshold of where it becomes a very low calorie diet. And that's what kind of was initially used for the very low calorie diet studies. So a little bit it's pegged to the weight loss literature. The other piece is like if you just think about that number, even relatively small people like 5'2", 130-pound females, if they are doing anything physically active, that is a low enough calorie intake to probably result in about a pound a week of weight loss.
So you just think that's kind of where it all started. I just don't under, I mean, well, I guess for what it's worth, you know what, here, this would be a good time to, let me look up our, I'm gonna put a link in here for you guys because, um, I don't want people thinking that 1200 calories is right for them. So
No, but that's where it's indexed, right? Because
sure.
like if you're designing a research study and you go, well, I want to look at the effects of very low calorie diets on people, what they're probably going to do is they're going to be like, okay, well, let's just pick some numbers. Let's do 1200, 1000, 800 and see what happens. Right? Like that's where it comes from. And so then you publish a study and 1200 calories a day, people lost weight.
Sure.
And what's really interesting is if you go look at that literature, because I remember one trial, and I can't remember who the author was, but I remember there was one trial where that's what they did. It was either 1200, 1000, and 800, or 1200, 800, and 600 calories a day, which is insanely low. All of them lost the same amount of weight.
Yeah,
it's because basically anything less than 1200 calories a day, or even at 1200 calories a day, adherence is so terrible. Pretty much everybody ends up eating the same amount of actual calories anyway.
Yeah. And somebody commented, and it does raise another point. It's not that 1200 wouldn't be appropriate for some people. There are some people who they're small enough, or just it's their lifestyle and their activity level, where 1200 calories may be actually where you need to be at for a deficit. But yeah, we got a comment here from Chelsea, says mine are 1282 right now in a deficit. So yeah, not far off of that. So there are certainly exceptions to that. Just some people just for most people that's less than you would actually want to adhere to.
Yeah, I mean, like, we don't need to keep hammering this point, but if I were running a study in the 1990s and I took the average adult female and their height and body weight and decided to say, hey, I'm going to make sure people lose about a pound a week, my dieting calories for that group of people at that time with the level of physical activity they were engaging in was probably 1200 to 1400 calories. Right? Now, that's in that context. Now, in the real world, it's going to be much different, right? If you've got a client who is trying to lose weight at that calorie intake, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to try to figure out how to change their training and their physical activity to where they can actually lose at like 14, 15, 1600 calories a day.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we have about a half hour left here, so there's other stuff I want to get to, but I do want to tackle one that I put on our notes here. Carbs stop fat loss. This is also really interesting to me because we know that's not true, but it's maybe we could, and maybe we shouldn't even tackle that one. What we actually may want to tackle is, because we've talked about it before, but alcohol stops fat loss, right? There's that idea. Do you want to tackle both those real quick, or one or the other? Because I think those are important to touch on. Just it's a little bit nuanced.
I mean, we can kind of tackle them in the same concept and same discussion. I mean, let's start with both of them are true in a sense and not true in another sense. So if you look at if you zoom in and you look at a very short acute time window, when you consume alcohol, you reduce the amount of fat oxidation that occurs in your body, right? Because your body begins to prioritize alcohol metabolism. So you reduce fat oxidation a little bit while your body's processing the alcohol. Then it resumes back to normal, right? The same thing is true when you consume carbohydrates. In an acute sense, when you consume carbohydrates, you reduce total fat oxidation in your body and you increase carbohydrate oxidation in your body. Like that's just the way it works, right? But when you zoom out over the time periods in which body fat loss occurs, that actually ends up not mattering. Because what actually matters is the level of energy deficit you have over weeks or months. And what's also interesting is the short-term acute changes in these things, even if they're consistently there for weeks or months at a time, it doesn't matter, right? So let's say I were to consume, let's just make a hypothetical situation. We know consuming carbohydrates decreases fat oxidation in an acute sense. If I were to just consume a little bit of carbohydrate every 30 minutes for a year, but still did not consume enough calories to be in an energy surplus, I would not gain weight. In fact, if I was in a deficit, I would lose weight.
Right.
So what happens is a lot of these like biochemical truths in an acute, very like myopic sense end up not mattering in the context of energy loss, right?
Yeah. 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 I think it's, yeah. These are just, there's so many. This gives us a mission to continue to educate people on these sorts of things because there's a lot of misinformation and misconceptions out there. So hey, I mean, not complaining because this gives us an opportunity just to educate. So, but yeah, I mean, we could make an entire episode out of that stuff. But given the remaining time that we have, I do want to dive into a few other things that I think people will benefit from. So, why? One of the questions that's been asked to me is if I want to lose weight and I know I have to be in a calorie deficit to do that, why wouldn't I just want to go like why wouldn't I just want to eat be in a huge deficit, just get it over with quickly versus a smaller one that takes a longer time, right? So, and I wrote down a couple things here that I'll just go over and we can touch on any of them or all of them. But as far as being in a deficit, you want something that is sustainable. So, what do we mean by that? You're going to be able to sustain and maintain a smaller deficit than you will a larger one, primarily because of hunger and energy levels. You're going to be hungrier than hell if you don't have have a large calorie allowance, and your energy levels are going to tank pretty quickly. So there's that. So, and we talk a lot about prioritizing consistency over perfection. So that's a huge thing. It matters. And then again, the psychological part. You've got hunger, your mood, and your energy, and then physical reasons. You have better adherence. You preserve your muscle better when you are in a larger deficit. You're putting yourself at risk for unwanted muscle loss. And obviously, when we're in a calorie deficit, we want to lose fat, not muscle. So a smaller calorie deficit makes it easier to preserve the muscle that you have. And then, flexibility is part of that too. If you're rigid and you're, I'm only going to eat 1,000 calories and it's going to be, just like this, you'll probably do better with what we call the 80-20 mindset, right? Have a eat mostly healthy foods, but 20% of what you take in can be discretionary calories. So if you're in a deficit and you want to have some ice cream that night, or you want to have a candy bar, you can fit that stuff in, and that will go a long way toward, again, this whole idea of sustainability. Being in a calorie deficit sucks, but we can make it suck less if we allow ourselves to eat some of the things that we enjoy eating. If we have a smaller deficit, so we're not so dang hungry all the time, and we don't have our energy levels aren't just on the floor. So those are a couple things that I think are important to mention when it comes to a sustainable effort when you're dieting. Is there anything else you would add?
I mean, I would add the context of I don't always think a larger calorie deficit is a bad thing. And there's a few situations in which giving somebody a larger calorie deficit makes sense. One is we know from the research literature that when people lose weight quickly, they tend to buy in better for longer term outcomes. So
that's an interesting concept. Yeah.
So you may find benefit, especially working with clients, of starting them with a slightly larger calorie deficit to get faster progress.
Just get the ball rolling. Yeah.
And there's two aspects to that. Like from a biology standpoint. One, if I reduce your calories to a larger degree, you're going to see a larger drop in scale weight because you're going to have less carbohydrates coming in across the board, which means you're going to have less glycogen, which means you're going to lose a little bit more water weight initially. So you may see like 4 pounds in the first week and you're like, I'm bought in, right? So there's a little bit of that piece to it. The second piece is your body can handle a larger calorie deficit in the early phases of
In
a
the
weight
initial,
loss
yeah, for
cycle
sure.
than it can 12, 16, 18, 24 weeks in, right? So if you're ever going to go big or go home, like do it at the beginning before your sleep starts to suck and adherence is terrible and all those things. The third reason is in some situations, the best thing you can do is lose body weight quickly for your overall health and risk profile. Like if you have someone who has a BMI of 35, 40, 45, like they have a larger amount of weight to lose. The cons of, hey, maybe adherence 6 months from now isn't as great. Hey, maybe we lose a little bit more lean mass than we expected, whatever. For them, if I can be a little bit more aggressive in the early phases and I can get 15, 20 pounds off in the first 2 months, I have now reduced their risk profile for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, et cetera, way more than I would have with any other intervention, right? Way more than medication, way more than anything else. So there are situations in which larger calorie deficits make sense. You just have to understand what tool you're using.
The situation, right? Yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah.
what I was thinking. Is these fringe populations, like you said, that maybe someone is,
Well, I don't even think they're
very at
fringe,
risk for. Yeah,
right?
well, they might not even be fringe these days. No, you're right. But just like there would be a reason where you'd want to take someone who's really overweight and be like, hey, we need to get you to lose weight quickly. And in that case, it would make sense.
Right. It's all context. Like, because
For sure.
were you in the meeting today, the Con Ed?
Mm-hmm.
So we
Yeah, I'll be
talked
on
about
site.
this a little bit of like 1,000 calorie a day deficit for a 45-year-old male former football player who now weighs 380 pounds. Like for him, that's a much different situation than a 45-year-old female who's 5'3" and 180 pounds who, wants to lose 30, 40 pounds over the course of a year. Like those are such drastically different situations in which 1,000 calorie a day deficit is right for one person and 1,000 calorie a day deficit is the wrong answer for the other person, right? One
Yeah,
person has
sure.
way more lean mass they can afford to lose. Their risk profile is much different. Their total energy expenditure in a given day, just based on their body size, is probably 4,000 calories a day. So 1,000 calorie a day deficit for them is 3,000 calories, versus the other person is like 1,900. So 1,000 calorie a day deficit is 900 calories. So it's like these are all so context dependent.
Yeah. Yeah. All the more reason, I think, to if you're someone who values that and everything we've talked about, context and situational, context and not just putting a blanket strategy or a blanket process over things, and you really want the nuance of, person person to person help, all the more reason to get a coach. I mean, these are the things that we talk about in our, between our coaches and clients all the time, and it's these sorts of situations where one person's situation isn't the same as the next, and so I need to think about how do I help this person versus that person, and so on and so forth. So something to think about as you guys are kind of watching. It can be incredibly valuable to have someone in your corner that's taking an objective assessment of everything Brad and I are talking about when it comes to your personal life and situation. I do want to round out. I think the next 15 minutes or so, we should kind of round this out with, like, what are some good practices for when I'm in a calorie deficit? Like, what are some best ways to manage this? How do I create and manage my calorie deficit in a smart way? And I think the first thing is, I put it on here earlier, but I'll put it on here again, is I think kind of step one is make sure that you have the right the right macros and calories, right? If you don't want to use a calculator that just gives you something that is not appropriate for you. And by you, I mean you have to take into consideration your activity level, your age, your gender, your height, your weight, all of that. And you can use our macro calculator. It's free, by the way, if anyone has not. So you can use our calculator to get your targets. Start there, and then I think the next thing, the other. I don't know if this is necessarily. I won't go by order of importance, but one of the most important things, and we've talked about this before, is the foods that you choose while you're dieting is going to make that's going to make a huge difference. if you, it's like, you remember that, the Pop Tart quote that I have mentioned in the Facebook group. Are you familiar?
Mm-mm.
Somebody made it into a meme, but it was one time I said, knowledge is knowing that you can eat Pop Tarts if they fit your macros. Wisdom is not wasting your macros on Pop Tarts, right? It's like, and the whole reason I said that is because when you're dieting, you have very few precious calories. You want to use them wisely. So I could eat 400 calories of Pop Tarts, which is about what two of those things are, and it's not very filling. It's not going to be very filling. It's not going to satisfy me. I could do it, or I could take those 400 calories and have like a steak, and that protein is going to make me feel more full. It's going to take me longer to digest it. So that's going to do a lot more for my hunger levels, thus my adherence, as opposed to something like Pop Tarts. So I think food choice matters immensely, right? We've talked about that before, but I think just getting the right calories and then how you manage your hunger is so huge.
Um, just trying to build on that. This kind of brings me back to a discussion that I was having with somebody the other day, and they were talking about, this whole concept of like tracking your calories just seems so crazy. And as humans, like we should be able to, figure out how to manage our body weight and intuitive eating, and we should all learn how to do that. And it reminded me of, there's nothing intuitive or natural about the world that we live in today. Like pretty much everything we do is against our biology, right? Like let me just walk you through the world we live in, right? We are bipedal creatures, right? So we have evolved to walk super efficiently. Like biomechanically, we are one of the most efficient moving animals on the planet. We can cover long distances with very low amounts of energy. So we're designed to walk. We don't walk anywhere, right? We have developed good thermoregulatory systems to where we can handle changes in temperature. And that's actually really good for us. We live in climate controlled environments, right? We've developed hormonal systems in our body to help us manage body weight over long periods of time and hunger, because we should be able to eat large meals and then go periods of time without eating meals. We don't do that, right? We eat 3 meals a day, usually. Like we're constantly eating all the time. We have designed in our neurobiology to seek calorie dense foods that help us survive. But usually those used to be fairly energy expensive to go get, right? Food used to be energy expensive to go get, not anymore. Everything in our environment is designed the opposite of our biology. So when we talk about intuitively eating, what does that even mean? And so what it really comes down to is we live in a world that's so opposite of what we're wired to do. What we really have to do is we have to learn about the energy content of the food we're consuming, develop a Rolodex of information in our head that we can look at a food and go, okay, I think this is roughly this amount of energy. And then we need to develop habits that teach us how to do that over time. We have to rewire our habits to match our current environment. We can't just let our natural biology dictate what we do. Because when we do that, when we actually eat intuitively, here's how I would eat intuitively if it was me. And I know how to manage my behavior pretty well. I would, if I ate how I wanted to eat every day, all the time, I would wake up, I would probably have a coffee, I would crush a box of cereal, I would then probably go get a donut. For lunch, I would go out to lunch somewhere delicious and tasty. I would probably have an afternoon snack of fresh cookies out of the oven and a glass of milk. For dinner, I would probably go to an all-you-can-eat buffet. and then I'd go to bed. Like that's what my body would be wired to do. And so when we actually what people actually mean when they mean intuitive eating is they mean do enough work to develop habits that the habits that you have align with the actual goals you have. And unfortunately, the world we live in today, those habits are actually opposite of what our environment pushes us to do. So the intuitive is actually counterintuitive.
It goes back to the whole environment thing. That's also why it's so important to structure and design your environment to be more conducive to your goals. Like you can help yourself develop those habits if your environment is right. But if your environment is inconducive to your goals and your habits, you're gonna have a hell of a hard time. So we can modify our environment to make it easier.
Yeah. It's like if I know I'm trying to lose weight and I'm on a calorie deficit, the restaurants I'm going to choose to go to are the restaurants that have options I can eat.
For sure.
Like I'm probably not going to go. Do you guys have Cracker Barrel out there?
No, I've been there though, but I know what it. Yeah, I know
like
what
I'm
it
not
is.
gonna like if I'm trying to lose weight, I'm not gonna go to a place where I get a 2,200 calorie breakfast. Like that's just
for sure.
Probably not a good environment to be in, right? But I am probably just gonna eat at home.
Yeah. When you're on vacation, like when you went to Mexico, did you? Because it was probably all inclusive, right? Do your behaviors change when you're? I mean, I know vacation is the exception, but like, do you find yourself eating drastically different when you're at an all inclusive place?
I mean, definitely, right? Okay. But like, I also have an understanding of what's reasonable and what's not, right?
For sure.
Like,
for sure.
Whenever we get there, we usually travel on a Saturday, and then like the place we go to always has like a really nice Sunday buffet brunch. So like, I'll go have a really big Sunday breakfast. Yeah. But then like lunch that day is probably like while I'm at the pool, it's probably like a couple
fish or something.
A couple fish tacos that are probably like 600 calories total. And then dinner's probably like a reasonable-ish, small-ish, reasonable dinner. Like I'm not going to have a 2,000 calorie breakfast and a 2,000 calorie lunch and a 2,000 calorie dinner and 2,000 calories worth of margaritas at the pool, right? Like I'm going to try to manage a little bit of, right? Am I always going to come back like probably a pound or two heavier? Yeah, but like, okay.
Yeah. I'm similar in that like I will have a large breakfast at the buffet, but then I'm not even hungry until dinner. So like I just cruise right through lunch. It's kind of, I don't know, that I guess it's just how I work. But yeah, I find that if I eat a large breakfast, I can pretty much cruise until dinner and then have another reasonable dinner portion and then be good. So
I mean, like here's a little bit of the analogy, right? Let's draw a financial analogy. Let's say you have two different ways of like spending money in a month in your life. Like one is you have a debit card that's linked to your checking account, right? And you know there's a finite amount of money in that checking account. So every time you go buy something, like you check your checking account the next morning to be like, oh, shoot, I spent more than I thought I did yesterday. So like today I'm probably not going to go out to lunch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm not going to go buy that shirt, or, oh, shoot, the utility bills are due tomorrow. So I probably, and I don't get paid until Friday. So today I'm probably not going to go buy the new shoes I wanted. I'll wait until Saturday. Like that's how I think about my calorie intake on a daily basis, right? Like I kind of do a check-in to be like, oh, hey, I probably can eat 2,700 calories a day. I had 800 at breakfast. I had 1,000 at lunch. Okay, dinner is going to be like 900. Or if it's like, hey, I had 2,000 calories at breakfast. Well, lunch is probably a protein shake and dinner is probably a salad, right? Most people treat it like a credit card. They just do whatever they want and they check the balance at the end of the month and hope it's less than the amount that they have in their checking account. And if it's not, well, I guess we're just paying some interest on it, right? Like those are just two different ways to think about managing stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really it is. It's an accounting system, is what tracking your calories and macros really is. You have a certain allowance. How you want to spend it is.
Did you get an allowance, kid?
Not really. No.
No, I didn't either.
No, I just was told I had to do stuff, and that was that.
I remember one time I like really got on my parents what get an allowance because my friends were having an allowance, and my dad was like, "Sure." But then every time you need batteries for your Game Boy, like you got to buy the batteries. And every time you want like a cereal that you want, not that I want, like you got to pay for the cereal. And I was like, I started to do the math. I was like, well, $5 a week, a pack of batteries is X. I'm never going to break even on this. No thanks.
Yeah. This doesn't sound like a good deal. My oldest daughter asks for an allowance, and I've said, like, okay, if you do the things that we ask you to do, sure, I'll give you an allowance. And then when it comes down to like actually doing the things that we ask her to do, it's sometimes she does and sometimes she doesn't. So I'm like, see, it doesn't matter. It's like you're not gonna like, no, you don't deserve the allowance. So she wants it, but she's not always willing to put in the work. So it just doesn't, I don't know, doesn't really work. I want to end on one final note. I wanted to mention one other thing is strength training in all of this. We didn't really touch on this. We could probably touch on it for a minute or two.
Do it. That's the only answer.
Yeah,
do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention like the importance of strength training while you're in a deficit. And I alluded it to it a little bit earlier, but obviously when you're losing weight, make sure if you can to lift weights or do some sort of resistance training because that is going to help you preserve the muscle that you have while you're in a deficit because your body doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm in a calorie deficit, so I'm only going to pull energy from my fat stores." Like it's going to take it from your entire body and your goal is to minimize the amount of energy it tries to get from your muscles to force it to, preferably take from fat.
So this was, we actually talked about this today in our continuing ed. This is related to a little bit different topic, but I brought this data up. If you take what we've learned from the weight loss and exercise literature and you kind of map this into what happens to your body when you lose about, let's just take the end of the extreme here, 30 pounds, and you either just diet or you diet and you engage in exercise like resistance training, anaerobic activity. If you lose 30 pounds and you just diet, about 8 to 10 pounds of that is going to be from your lean body mass. So that's bone tissue, muscle tissue, organ tissue, etc. If you engage in exercise while you lose that 30 pounds, only about 1.5 to 2 pounds of it. So like 4 to 5-fold less of your weight will come from lean mass loss. Like that's a huge difference. There are, with the exception of like performance enhancing drugs, there's nothing else as effective.
Yeah.
Which is kind of wild when you think about it.
For sure. Yeah. There you have it. That seems like a good note to end this on. I hope people found this beneficial. But to sort of recap, hey, use our calculator, get yourself an appropriate set of macros. Make sure it's not too steep. Choose the right foods. By that I mean eat foods that help you feel full and stay fuller for longer. Protein's a good one. Just choose the right foods. Eat slowly is another good one, and strength train. There's a lot more to it than that, but we're obviously we're pressed for time here. But and don't forget, consistency over perfection. If you can sustain something and like maintain it pretty well, you're going to do better than trying to be perfect at something that you can't sustain. So that's how I would wrap that up. I don't have anything else. You got anything?
Negative, Ghost Rider.
In that case, we'll be back next week at the same time. We have another good episode lined up for you guys. I won't tease what it is, but if you liked this one, you will like the next one. If you didn't get to catch the whole episode, I will upload this to our regular YouTube video section. This is in the live section, but I always re-upload these to the video section. So anyone that missed the whole episode can go back and watch it. And thanks for joining us. That's all I got. We're going to duck out of here. Until next time, guys. Adios.
Bye.